Last week, the devs posted some early balance ideas they were looking at, mostly revolving around World vs. World and PvP. They previewed a ton of trait and skill changes across the 9 professions. Actually, I think Thief wasn't in it, but opened that up for the community to give feedback. A lot of the time when you see something like that on the forums, you wonder how much the devs will really register or look at before the patch actually comes. But this time, it seems pretty good. It's a week later, and they've given us an update. There's now a bunch of new skill changes, including confirmation of some big reworks, the details of which are not specified. But if, for example, you're a Necromancer interested in death magic and minions, and you felt a bit underwhelmed by that for years, they've just confirmed a rework for that. So I'm going to make this video just like I did last time. We discussed the changes that they proposed. Now let's see what their revised changes are and where the balance could be going in the future. Again, this is largely World versus World oriented, so bear with it, but let's roll on through. So starting off here, thanks for the feedback regarding the proposed changes last week. Below you'll find a set of changes we're looking at for World vs. World, as well as a few modifications to some of the changes from the last thread. With these changes, the objective is still to bring the dominant builds and compositions into line, offer more build diversity to the existing meta. Because there's been some confusion, we want to clarify that we are continuing to balance for other game types, including, as some of you guessed, significant changes to the Warrior's Tactics line, as well as the Necromancer's Death Magic line, Ranger Sword changes, and more. So those are the big 3 things they mentioned at the head. For some of you guys who don't World vs. World much or play much PvP, the competitive areas, that might be one of the biggest takeaways from this whole video, frankly. And we don't get the specifics. But especially Death Magic, I can see why they'd look at Tactics too, but especially Death Magic, I'm really excited about this. I think that more of my thoughts for Death Magic, though, lie with PvE and where it could be fun there. Turret Engineer is a build as well that I think should be and could be way stronger for open world PvE and world bosses and story and stuff. But obviously that's not to do with World vs. World. So hopefully the devs have the same opinion, and that's why we don't see them actually go further on this just yet. And we'll get more of that later. Anyway, as before, this isn't the full set of changes to prepare, and this is not a call for general feedback. This is just for the stuff they're talking about. So when you guys watch my video, you're going to have opinions different to mine, of your own. In the description, there's a link to this thread. Go put your feedback down. But answer these questions specifically. Would your gameplay change as a result? Do you feel they'd improve or worsen the game? Are you looking forward to the changes and why? What are your concerns, the consequences? Those are the questions I'm going to try and answer right now. So what they've done is they've added some stuff. Anything that's the same as the last video or the last post is written in italics. So this down here, the chemical field, that hasn't changed. So we will be skipping over that on this video. If you want to know those changes, you can check out my previous production. But here, for example, look at the engineer. Look at all these other things. They're different now, right? And we've got a whole new section as well, items. So let's roll on in. The first item we're looking at is the superior rune of the Antitoxin. So I wonder if I can actually trading post this for you guys. Now, this is a big World versus World thing that I never mentioned on my previous video. Obviously, they were looking, I think, we actually have to craft it, maybe. It's a Season 1 thing, right? Antitoxin. Yeah, it's not coming up. But basically, this is a big World versus World thing. We were looking at Purge gyro and stuff and lots of cleanse. Well, what's actually going on is you'll find engineers running this rune. And what it means is every time they cleanse, they double cleanse, right? Which is like crazy when you're an engineer and you have stuff like cleansing on prot and purity of purpose that makes those cleanses into boons. So here's the change that they're making, and this would be very significant. In fact, several of you in my comments of the previous video pointed this out, and now the devs have listened. Change this rune so that instead of increasing outgoing condition cleanses by 1, it instead increases incoming condition cleanses by 1. So it would only affect the wielder of the rune and would scale with external cleanses. So the idea now is if you run this rune, everybody else cleansing you, you're getting double value out of. But as you cleanse other people, you don't. I quite like that. It means that you could still selfishly do that in scenarios where you think that a lot of condition pressure is incoming, but you don't have this one guy in the whole Zerg that completely deals with that aspect of the game because he's on that rune. So, yeah, I think that's fine, and this is an interesting novel way of approaching it that we don't often see ArenaNet go for. Now, let's have a look at the engineer, where they do have several new changes based on what we saw before. The only thing remaining, as I mentioned, is the chemical field becoming detection pulse. I was in favor of this. I'm glad to see the community in general seems to be, and the devs are going with it. Obviously, if you're a very stealth-oriented player, you're not going to like it. And there's a ton of reveal in World vs. World already. I would just tack that extra thing on. I want a little bit more like animation or UI quality. You know how the screen crowds in when you're blind, right? What if there was something like that just representing when you've got reveal on you? Maybe a white version of that or something. You get what I mean? So the first thing they've listed listed here, the Purge Gyro, this is the same change as before, dropping the cleansing pulses. But if they do the Antitoxin thing, they might not affect it at all, which makes sense. Sneak Gyro, they're actually thinking now, instead of going to 75 seconds, they're thinking of going to 60. Not such a big cooldown nerf as they were previously talking about. I didn't have many thoughts on that. Clearly other people did. Next, they're saying Corona Burst. That's your skill 3 on Hollow, the big wave, 2 packets. You can trait it to give you stab, rolls lots of heat up, an extremely cool skill. They're nerfing its damage, shaving it down by 20%. I actually don't know whether I agree with this. I think if you're going to shave Hollow's damage, I would rather you do it on the autos and the 2, because Corona Burst is a fun thing to, like, play around. You can see where the first wave comes from, and often that will clip you because it's a quick animation time. But the second pulse, like, that's fun. I like that being a thing to actually, like, play around. If you want to dip down what they are actually doing in Forge, I would go for sort of the baseline damage and sort of the stuff that you're going to get hit with anyway, and you can't really save dodges for and stuff, and you can't try to outrange. But nonetheless, the idea of Hollow dipping down a bit, I like for the sense of PvP at least. Then also we have the Shockwave. Now this is an amazing change. This is a change I've been looking at for a long time. So let's actually tech Hollow here. And let's look at this. So we're talking about the skill 5, this holographic shockwave. We jump up, we slam down, we send this wave out. Now this currently has a huge radius, 600 radius. It's mental. Now this is a launch. It's a big CC. It's a launch on a value of 0, but it's a big CC. And it's on a low cooldown because of the flow of the kit and how that works, so it's kind of hard to play with that. What I've never really liked about this from a PvP perspective is if I'm trying to kill this line guard, I go rushing in, and I decide that I'm going to hit him here. I might overheat from this, right? But I go for him here. I might have accidentally CC'd like 3 people here, and it goes up the Z-axis and stuff. Or if I haven't CC'd them, I might have blown dodge rolls, and I'm just accidentally doing that. And I get that, you know, Hollow needs things to make it identifiably awesome, and that's one of the big parts of it, juggling that mass CC. This is a very identifiable thing, but I just think the radius is too high. Let people do it, but don't have these shockwaves traveling a million miles away up and down ledges and stuff, and still forcing cooldowns and dodges and stuff off of people. I think it's crazy. I think it's like that kind of brain dead spammy stuff that I don't like in Guild Wars. You know, you will see if you look at my suggestions for other classes, reducing bounce and whatnot. Bounces, this is the same to me. So I've always wanted a radius dip on this. And look, they're doing it. They're actually doing it by loads. I wouldn't have even said to go all the way down by half, but that's what they're doing. This is going to feel like a very different skill after this. This is going to be a significant change to Hollow. And, you know, Hollow's well up there at the moment, so you might say that it's okay. In point-blank range, this is still going to be good. In downstate cleave scenarios, this is still going to be good. But it's just going to refine away a lot of that accidental and passive pressure that Hollow's put out that makes them so keen in, you know, solo and duo queues for ranked at the moment. So I like the change. In fact, it might be even a little bit over, but there you have it. Next, they're saying Impact Savant, looking for a way to make condition damage affect it, and reducing the vitality loss from 300 to 180. So the vitality loss you get as a scrapper would actually be less so. I can't remember if this was in the previous changes. I guess it wasn't because it's not in italics. Which is interesting to me because Scrapper became so significantly buffed with the rework recently. Now we see a lot less of them, but it's still pretty good. So, you know, they're trying to, like, split the difference. It makes sense if that's what they're going for. With Guardian, they're being pretty interesting. Not many changes, really, from their previous suggestions. And that means they're doubling down with some of the Aegis spam on Firebrand. So check this out. They say Sanctuary changes going through. The Tome of Courage with the Aegis being removed is going through. Tome of Resolve's Cleanse is going through. Then you have the skill 5 on the Tome of Courage. Well, they're going to let you keep your retail on it, but they're still taking the Aegis away. They're still taking the 2 big sources of Aegis on F3 out of the game. Incredible. I think that's going to mean a lot for World vs. World, where all those blocks make Zergs very, very turtly and have really refined the possibilities of playing 1vx, you know, having a 5-man group taking out a 10 to 15-man group. It's been a lot harder to break through all that Aegis since Path of Fire. Well, that's dipping down there. I think that might mean there's a bit less burn coming out on, you know, some of the Scourge gameplay, right? Because a lot of the Aegis corrupts into that. But still, this is pretty big. There is a new change here as well, and that's Stand Your Ground. So this bit went up to 10 targets recently. They said that they kind of wanted Guardian to be viewed as this big stability bot, right? Which it kind of always has been, but in the world of today, they wanted to bump up to 10 targets. Well, they're dripping the stacks down. Instead of it being 5 full stacks, it's 3. So that is relevant. That's very much a world versus world change, and you can see they're only doing it world versus world. In a lot of other game types, you know, anywhere over 3 is almost as good as 5 in a lot of game types. To eat, you know, 4 versus 6 CCs for the actual CC to finally go through, it's kind of crazy in most game types. Mostly that stability is representing a potential corrupt interfere or anything. Once you're over 3 stacks, that's like the golden number. But for world versus world, when it comes with dropping static fields and stuff in chokes and all the kinds of CCs that people can drop and you have to push through, suddenly the stack count does matter almost exclusively in world versus world. So knocking it from 5 to 3, again, it's just squishing up those zergs a little bit to make the fights a little bit more interesting, a little bit more volatile. So hopefully the community agrees with that. It sounds good in principle to me. For Mesmer, they really don't have many updated changes, more doubling down. So the mantras, straight away, the idea of you have to have line of sight and you have to face them, those changes are going through. I think the community is probably applauding those. I certainly am. But they do have a difference for Illusion of Life. So this is a skill that I use a lot, have talked about a lot, why it's become so strong in recent years, the invulnerability frames. If you see my previous video, I spent a good time illustrating exactly what is potent about it. I also asked for feedback on this in World vs. World. Some of you guys said that Illusion of Life is ran on Mesmers in World vs. World, but Mesmer itself is not ran very much in World vs. World. Mesmer itself has not been such a premium thing to take with you, so you do see a bit less of it. And even when it is ran and you do have Mesmers out there, sometimes the cleave happens so quick, even on a 1.25 second cast time, is not enough to get the res off in time. So that was the feedback I got from you, and I gave the devs a lot. Well, check it out. They have changed their mind about the nerf. Instead of increasing the cooldown and changing its duration, which I was in favor of the idea of nerfing, but I thought there were better nerfs. They've instead said, reduce the invulnerability period on revived allies. Also, improve the smart targeting on this skill so it can't fail in big group situations where there's someone downed and lots of people near them. So I'm not sure what they mean by the smart targeting. I ground target this. Are they talking about like snap to ground target? I don't know what this is really, the smart targeting element. But I guess it could just accidentally fail when it wasn't supposed to. Read this bit as a bug fix. But here's the nerf they're doing. They're actually completely just doing the invulnerability thing. So this is really big. This is something that I actually think is more important. Especially with all the Condi Cleave now actually being able to hit people. You know, when someone goes down, guys, if it's World versus World or PvP, they are static and they are eating Condi bombs, right? They're getting like so much on them. If when Illusion of Life reses them, it makes them invulnerable to both power damage and condition damage. This never used to be true back in the day. If it now does that, that's like a huge difference. So culling that invulnerability away, I think is really big. What I also find interesting about this change is if we go way back in Guild Wars 2, it used to be that you would get invulnerability on hitting downstate and invulnerability on leaving downstate, both ways. But if you guys remember, the devs actually removed some of that. A lot of stuff that used to res you and give you invulnerability isn't there anymore. And getting invulnerability as you go down as well isn't there anymore. So it felt like the devs were moving away from that. And they just forgot about a couple of skills. So like Elementalist, you guys might not know this, Elementalist has a revive skill that will, again, put that invulnerability on people res, but you can actually revive yourself as well. Glyph of Renewal, cast in fire, you will res yourself, and it does the Illusion of Life thing. It gives you that really long-lasting invulnerability. Now, these are obscure parts of the game that people are only just starting to strategize and figure out and work with in some instances. Still, no one uses that Glyph of Renewal, mostly because of its cooldown and its cast time and stuff. But that's there, and it just feels like an aberration. It feels like that's not meant to be. So I think that if the devs are doing this with Illusion of Life, it says something about, like, they're actually okay with the invulnerability there, which is news to me. And if they're doing this with Illusion of Life, I absolutely think ArenaNet should look at Glyph of Renewal in fire right now on this patch before you have to deal with it a few years down the line. Consistency would be very important. So I like the idea of the change. Overall, I actually think this is not as big of a nerf anymore. But it's kind of situational now. I actually think they have loosened their grip on the nerf. And I probably got some bias because I use this skill a lot. I'm trying to push that bias aside and be completely objective. I do still think this is a bit smarter, though, for the way the game is. There's counterplay. More counterplay is always good, right? And that's the point. You can Condi bomb someone harder if you're anticipating an Illusion of Life, and it will mean something more before they get res. And you can actually start counter DPSing them very quickly, too. I still think my endurance idea is very good. Maybe it's a bit annoying to code, though. So then they also say Chaotic Interruption, one of their other changes. They want to specify that it will only hit weapon skills that were already on cooldown. So I I always assumed that that was how it was going to work. I didn't think it would cool down my Warlock when it wasn't even off cooldown. Maybe, though, that's an important thing to think about. Maybe I can interrupt. Maybe if I just Chaos Storm and I interrupt them with it, I'm guaranteed to refund the Chaos Storm because I haven't used any other skills yet. Maybe there's some playmaking potential there or something. I'm still not hot on this trait, though. Think about this, too. The trait might hit a skill that is on cooldown, but it's on its last second of cooldown, or even half second of cooldown, and it's basically wasted. That's going to happen a lot. I think this is a lame Grandmaster. I'm not very excited, I really have to say still. And yeah, the other two changes the same. So for Necromancer, there's actually a ton of new stuff that's appeared, but it's pretty much entirely Scourge-oriented. Now, I seem to remember on the last video we were talking about Sandflare. Was I suggesting they did something with this when they actually hadn't listed it? Well, now there are changes for Sandflare. And I actually think to those PvEers watching me right now, you're actually looking at some big buffs for PvE, especially if you like playing support Scourge. So check this out. First of all, Oppressive Collapse. This is one of my other favorite changes, something I've wanted for ages. This is Torch 5. This will now require line of sight on the activation. So this is the skill, I guess I need to find a golem to demonstrate it to you guys, that has insane quality of life on it right now. Basically, you can just press the 5 anywhere in 900 range. You do have to be facing the target. And it will create this puddle under someone, grab them, and hard CC. Also good Torment, good Burn, trait synergies. You can put a Sigil of Agility on your Scepter Torch, just like I do. Weapon swap and Oppressive Collapse, and you get a quickness cast. It's very hard for people to dodge. And it goes through everything. It's amazing. It's a big part of being a Scourge, to be honest. Landing this through walls and doing stuff with it. And I've never really liked that. Mostly, I haven't liked it because it's inconsistent with other mechanics in the game. Like another skill that came in with Path of Fire and is very similar in terms of its animation, it just comes from above instead of below, is Fracturing Strike on the Elementalist. And I've always felt, well, look, if Oppressive Collapse gets to be no LOS, so should Fracturing Strike. If Fracturing Strike isn't allowed to be no LOS, then Oppressive Collapse shouldn't be. You know, these things should have a natural logic that they follow. And if Scourge is reliant on this being no line of sight to be good, well, then you need to look at the skills themselves. Don't, like, break the rules and the integrity of the game. So, they have finally gone through and changed that. I'm going to actually have a real learning period playing Scourge. I actually play a lot of Scourge. People probably don't realize this about me. And I've got a lot of muscle memory for using this, you know, up and down ledges at Kylo, all over the places. And now I have to be more careful. This is actually kind of good as well for 1v1 builds as far as PvP is concerned. In that, if they're ever outnumbered and there's a Scourge there, which they kind of want, they want to be 1vx and pull a Scourge away from a team fight, the Scourge has an even bigger job now of getting that pressure through, like, difficult kite spots and stuff they actually will need to see. So this is actually going to be pretty big, I think. It really will be pretty big, so it's a good change. Next, though, we have a ton of stuff to do with barrier. I'm going to read all of these out, okay? So Sand Cascade, this is the F3. They're reducing the base barrier by 33%, only in World vs. World and PvP, but across the whole game, if I'm reading this right, they're increasing the healing power coefficient by 20%, as it's already pretty strong. So that's a buff for everywhere that's not World vs. World and PvP, but base is going down. So basically, what you're going to want to do is, if you're using these in PvP, in World vs. World and PvP, you really need to make sure that healing power is there. I mean, most successful Scourges in PvP are on Sage anyway, and they got some healing power there. So I don't think it will really change things much. But for World vs. Worlds, I think this cuts away some of the defense on the Power Scourge variants that we're seeing. Sandflare, they're reducing the base barrier that's being given, but increasing the healing power coefficient. And that seems fun to me. As long as the big juicy barrier procs are on there, that's the fun part of that skill, as I explained. For Desert Shroud, same thing. The base barrier is going down, but healing power coefficient's going up. That's the same story as before. But also, they're nerfing the flat damage by 20%. Again, I think that's looking directly in the eye of the Power Scourges, okay? Trying to shuffle the Condi stuff a little bit more forward, I think, here, with that Antitoxin change and deprioritizing playing Power Scourge. Then also, we've got Sand Savant. So, they don't really actually have anything here. They're just explaining. So, Sand Savant, if you guys don't know, is the Grand Master for Scourge, which means instead of having 3 small shades, you actually have one big one that affects 5 targets instead of 3, okay? And so I guess this is going to be the go-to for World vs. World, because you want that big, broad area to hit the whole Zerg. This is probably a little bit too precise, a little bit too minute. So anyway, here's what they say. We want to address the target cap issue with this trait in World vs. World for a long while. So I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about. You guys might want to mention this in comments. Is this the idea that I can hit 5 targets on my shade over there And I'm hitting 5 down here, so I'm like at 10 total. Is that they think that this is an issue? This is too prominent for World versus World if I'm spreading properly. But here they say it's an incredibly gnarly problem because this is a large functional change that would need to be preserved between game modes. What they're saying is they don't want this trait to look completely different in World versus World than it does elsewhere. It's just number changes and stuff that they want to split. That's why this cooldown split was made on this trait originally. We hear you that the trait's an issue and we're working on it. It's a tough case to crack in a manner that does not leave one mode suffering due to the changes made for another. So I guess there are just a lot of people saying, look, you're trying to touch Scourge stuff in World vs. World. Why isn't Sand Savant being talked about? Well, they are talking about it. They just don't have anything concrete. What do you guys think they could do? And then these changes here, same as before, just reducing the Boon Corrupt on Scepter 3 and its traded counterpart. So over on Ranger, once again, they're looking at the auto attack long range shot. This is the only change. We did a big discussion on this before. I won't go into it again. But I guess the numbers might have changed. Here's the numbers they're going with now. 0.7 to 0.9 as it currently is into 0.6 to 0.8. My criticism before was I liked it all. We did a big discussion, but I just didn't want them to squeeze the range. They are still squeezing the range. It's just maybe it's not so severe anymore. Or is this the same and they just didn't italicize it? That's Ranger though. Sorry to the Ranger fans. Revenant, I'm in a similar situation. I could have sworn that the details they're giving here were already expressed. So again, we're over on Herald and we're dealing with Hammer. 2 changes. Gaze of Darkness. This is the Herald flip over skill. Vulnerability, Stun Break, Blind, Reveal. This skill would reveal stealth people up to 600 away in addition to striking enemies 360. They said that before, right? Why is this not italicized? I'm pretty sure that's the same change. And then the Hammer change is exactly the same before as they were talking about. I guess that means the community's on board with it and they're happy. So, we'll see how that lands. I do want to see Hammer in more than just World vs. World, though. If they kill it completely in World vs. World, then that's going to feel pretty bad. Next, we have a new one. The Thief. Thief was not in the previous balance preview. It didn't have a single change. Now, if I were competitively minded and I saw that, I would wonder, why the hell aren't you looking at Condi Thief, ArenaNet? You buffed the hell out of it last patch with the new changes down here in Deadly Arts and Deadly Ambition. So Deadly Ambition right now is if we hit someone with anything, there's no real condition beyond that, we put 2 stacks of poison on them that linger a long time. You put just a bit of poison duration in your build, this is permanent 2 stacks of poison. It's good damage. Poison alone, okay, is a brilliant condition because of how it diminishes your heals. As a thief, you can really apply this. You can go potent poison, which makes it like really aggressive and do damage. When you go potent poison, you can add another stack, so it's 3 poison you're lingering on people. And the minor gives you extra condition damage. This is an adept trait, not minor, sorry. This is an adept trait. Insane trait. Why aren't you looking at ArenaNet? Well, here we go. So they have added a section. Deadly Ambition. Reduce the poison inflicted by this trait from 2 stacks for 3 seconds, which, you know, can be permanent uptime if you go for poison duration. They're going from 2 stacks to 1 stack, and they're hitting the duration as well. The ICD is also going down from 5 to 2. So it's still a trait that just says, hey, constantly have poison. If you build on the new version 100% poison duration, you're sustaining 2 stacks on people now. So it's a nerf. I think, personally, this nerf that they've got here, they could also remove the flat Condi damage gain on it as well. They could remove, it's just power creep. It doesn't need to be a double trait that does that too. I think they could remove that and we would be perfectly fine. Like, look at the number of stats a lot of 10% convergence traits give you at the master tier. And then look at this, okay? It's crazy. So I can't believe they're looking at it, but they're still being this conservative with the change. Condi Thief's very strong. It would still be very strong, even with that extra bit that I'm talking about there. That's all they're really previewing. Again, what they said at the start was that there's going to be other stuff. But there you have it. That's your Thief nerf. And I think that will be good for and healthy for the competitive areas of the game. Remember, guys, nerfs are often very healthy. Lastly, we have Warrior, which had all of the big updates in terms of Warhorn, and they've mentioned that a tactics change will be coming in as well. We just don't know what that tactics change will be. However, for the preview, they've gone with one little update. Everything they're happy with, everything, except something I actually mentioned on my video. I pointed out with their new Warhorn change, they're thinking of a skill that will buff the next ally's attacks damage by 25%. I pointed out that that would be crazy in World vs. World. They're trying to nerf Hammer 2 in this release. Well, you just pair that with a Warhorn Warrior, And it's very easy to Warhorn and then use the hammer too. I mean, I like the idea that you have to do that, like this cross-profession synergy to reclaim the power that they've just nerfed away baseline. I like that. But I think the devs thought, oh yeah, hold on, maybe that's a bit silly. So there's a world versus world specific change to that. The rest is the same. Look at this, okay? Quick breathing, no changes from the previous video. Sight beyond sight, no changes. Call to arms, no changes. Charge, though. This skill would only remove movement impairing conditions and then increase the damage of affected allies next to attacks by 25% in PvE and PvP, but 10% in World versus World, in addition to his previous effects. Also, they're going to increase the swiftness duration, and the skill becomes a blast finisher. We already knew those two, though. But this is the thing. It's now just a 10% modifier in World vs. World. So it's there, efficient groups, people really try hard in. They'll still be able to take advantage of that new synergy they're adding to the game. But it kind of doesn't undermine the whole Hammer 2 thing they were looking at before. I still am very, very curious about all the other stuff going on with Warrior and where we can apply it and how tactics will look. But I guess time will have to tell on that. So there you go. That's the update. That's the next post. Guys, let me know if this video was good. The last one, I was kind of thinking, right, it's a forum post. Are people going to be interested in the discussion we can have? I think it went really well. A lot of you guys had a lot of cool comments, and it was worthwhile. This one's a lot thinner on the ground, though. So are you still enjoying this video? Let me know. Otherwise, you know, I'll cull these away. And we'll see what else is going on. But yeah, so cheers, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And if you've disagreed with me at any point, now's your chance. Go to the forums. Links in the description. Cheers, everyone. See you soon.